Leviticus, chapter 4. The Lord spoke to Moses. He said, "Speak to the sons of Israel and say, a man may sin inadvertently against any one of the commandments of the Lord and do one of the forbidden things. In such a case, if the one who sins is the anointed priest, thus making the people guilty, then for the sin which he has committed he is to offer to the Lord a young bull, an animal from the herd without blemish, as a sacrifice for sin. He is to bring the bull before the Lord at the entrance to the tent of meeting. He is to lay his hand on its head and immolate it before the Lord. Then the appointed priest must take a little of the blood of the bull and take it into the tent of meeting. He shall dip his finger in the blood and sprinkle it over the veil of the sanctuary 7 times before the Lord. Then the priest must put a little of the blood of the bull on the horns of the altar of incense that smokes before the Lord in the tent of meeting, and he is to pour all the rest of the bull's blood at the foot of the altar of holocaust at the entrance to the tent of meeting. Of all the fat of this bull offered as a sacrifice for sin, this is what he will remove: the fat that covers the entrails, all the fat that is on the entrails, the 2 kidneys, the fat that is on them and on the loins, the fatty mass which he will remove from the liver and kidneys, exactly as was done with the portion set apart in the communion sacrifice, and the priest must burn these on the altar of holocaust. The bull's skin, all its flesh, its head, legs, entrails and dung, the whole of the bull, must be carried outside the camp to a place that is clean, the place where the ashes from the fat are thrown away, and the bull must be burnt there. If the whole community of Israel has sinned inadvertently, and without being aware of it has done something that is forbidden by the commandments of the Lord, the community is to offer a young bull as a sacrifice for sin, an animal of the herd without blemish, when the sin of which they have been guilty is discovered. The animal must be brought before the tent of meeting. Before the Lord, the elders of the community shall lay their hands on the bull's head, and it must be immolated before the Lord. Then the anointed priest is to carry a little of the blood of the bull into the tent of meeting. He is to dip his finger in the blood and sprinkle the veil before the Lord 7 times. Then he must put a little of the blood on the horns of the altar that stands before the Lord inside the tent of meeting, and then pour out all the rest of the blood at the foot of the altar of holocaust at the entrance to the tent of meeting. Then he is to remove all the fat from the animal and burn it on the altar. He must treat this bull as he did the other for the sacrifice of sin. It is to be treated in the same way, and when the priest has performed the rite of atonement over the people, they will be forgiven. He must have the bull taken out of the camp and burn it as he burned the first one. This is the sacrifice for the sin of the community. When a leader sins and inadvertently does one of the things forbidden by the commandments of the Lord his God, thus rendering himself guilty, or if anyone draws his attention to the sin thus committed, he is to bring a goat as an offering, a male without blemish. He is to lay his hand on the goat's head and immolate it in the place where the holocausts are immolated before the Lord. This is a sacrifice for sin. The priest is to take a little of the victim's blood on his finger and put it on the horns of the altar of holocaust. Then he must pour out its blood at the foot of the altar of holocaust and burn all the fat on the altar, as with the fat in the communion sacrifice. This is how the priest is to perform the rite of atonement over this leader to free him from his sin, and he will be forgiven. If one of the people sins inadvertently and makes himself guilty by doing something forbidden by the commandments of the Lord, or if anyone draws his attention to the sin he has committed, he is to bring a she-goat as an offering for the sin he has committed, a female without blemish. He is to lay his hand on the victim's head and immolate it in the place where the holocausts are immolated. The priest is to take a little of its blood on his finger and put it on the horns of the altar of holocaust. Then he must pour out all the rest of the blood at the foot of the altar. Then he is to remove all the fat, as the fat was removed for the communion sacrifice, and the priest shall burn it on the altar as an appeasing fragrance for the Lord. This is how the priest is to perform the rite of atonement over the man, and he will be forgiven. If he wishes to bring a lamb as an offering for this kind of sacrifice, he is to bring a female without blemish. He is to lay his hand on the victim's head and immolate it as a sacrifice for sin in the place where the holocausts are immolated. The priest is to take a little of the blood of the sacrifice on his finger and put it on the horns of the altar of holocaust. Then he must pour out all the rest of the blood at the foot of the altar. He is to remove its fat as was done for the sheep in the communion sacrifice, and the priest shall burn it all on the altar, in addition to the burnt offering for the Lord. This is how the priest is to perform the rite of atonement over the man, and he will be forgiven.